looking at my father's career, he worked for a company called General Foods. And he always used to say, well, it's not the product, it's what I get to do and who I get to do it with. And that was always kind of interesting to me. And I used to think about that. And I thought, well, I agree with him. However, I do need for myself to add that element of, if not so much the product, then the impact of that product. And I don't think, have to feel the exact same level of passion that I do for this mission. But I do think you have to have that propensity to say, this really, truly does matter to me.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside your company. And joining me today is David Hurwitt, the founder of Troove. Now, Troove is a company that helps college applicants take the guesswork out of finding the perfect college fit. And it's obviously a relevant and fascinating space that they're in relationship to the work that we do, which is around further developing people at work. And I took that opportunity to really ask David what his perspectives have been and sort of thoughts on what that college admissions process looks like and how kids are being prepared for the workplace. We dive into some of those insights that from the data that they've picked up from Troove, as well as David's own perspective around having kids and going through the college admissions process himself. We also spent some time talking about hiring for your business and how to find a cultural fit around curiosity, which is obviously near and dear to my heart. And David shares some practical tips on how they do that at Troove. And it was also a great conversation to cover things like going from discipline to disappointment and riding that wave without losing enthusiasm. And there's a great sales story that David shares on that point. There are plenty more fantastic insights that come from this episode. It's one of the few that I'm not talking to someone who's in the practice of professional development inside companies, but really focusing on that persona of the person that's coming into companies. And I think you will also find it fascinating listening to David's insights. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with David Hurwitt. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so you at the moment are founder and CEO of Troove. And we're going to unpack what Troove does and how you kind of have got to this point. But where I really, really want to spend a big chunk of our conversation together today is to unpack that journey that you've traveled to get here and to kind of draw out some of the lessons that you're now applying in growing Troove. And that's really, I think, what's interesting to the people on this show is it's particularly now, right? The ability for leaders to be able to lead in high pressure situations, to be able to lead through uncertainty, volatility. It's always kind of been there. It's also now for some reason feels like it's never been higher. What does uncertainty and volatility look like for you over your career?
So my career spans probably 30 plus years now at this point. And so I grew up in a generation and with a father who had sort of the very conventional, went to college, then actually this is a little unconventional, got an MBA at the time, but then spent 30 years with one Fortune 500 company and rising up that ladder, and had the impression that, and sort of raised me thinking along those same lines, that you go to a big company, you get into a training program, you climb the ladder, and there's essentially a ladder. And that is all completely changed. And so that change through the course of my career has sort of kept me on my toes and actually been very good for me, because I'm not cut out for go sit in one company for 30 years. And those companies no longer do that anyway. So that's, they've met me there. It's fine. But the pressure to me of sort of always being in your right place and knowing when to leave, knowing when to say, okay, this isn't working. It's not serving me. It's not serving our customers. That's the real challenge for me because I'm sort of a go down with the ship kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so to be nimble enough and to be humble enough to sometimes admit along this path that you're on a rung of a ladder or climbing one of the many branches of the ladder that now exist
Mm-hmm.
that's just not going to work out, and you need
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, look, let's step back, figure out what we've learned, figure out where to go from here, and then just take action. So it's that uncertainty, and the need to have a greater level of self-awareness today, I think is really where a lot of pressure comes from for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's this is a great way to start. So there's a lot to unpack here. I can totally relate to that ladder of leadership because my dad was the same. He spent 30 odd years at one company, and that's how my career started when I first that was the intent, right? Mine has gone in various different directions. So maybe to add some color to that, where in your journey did you kind of that click for you and you realize like, oh, hang on, this is like where did you take that step back and sort of realize I needed to pivot and then do something that probably those around you were like, why is he doing that?
Yeah. um, so I started with these big companies, went back to business school myself, got an MBA at Northwestern, went back to a big company, was in these training programs. But I always thought, okay, at some point I'm going to sort of take the training wheels off and do this myself, right? That I'm learning. And before you know it, you're, in your mid 30s saying, okay, I need to stop kidding myself or admit that I'm a big company guy that just wants to sort of sit and dream about things that I'm not going to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to be that person. And so I left, actually, I was working at General Electric. So sort of quintessential big
Yeah.
company, doing fine, but just not in my right place. I was really ready to say, okay, I don't want to. In fact, I used this phrase with my wife. I said, I feel like I am tending sandcastles on someone else's beach.
Hmm.
And the idea there for me was that sort of these were temporary structures and that the waves of time will wash them away and no one will ever know that I was there. It just doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And life has to have more meaning. And I'm sort of very connected to the mission of what I do and to what it's doing for me and for the world around me. And so that idea of doing something that's going to last and making a
Hmm.
change for the world to make it better, to leave it better than what I found, really was important to me. So I
Hmm.
left General Electric. I went to a startup that had just gotten its first round of funding, trying to create a new style of wind turbine, and was, I don't remember what number employee, but single digit kind of number employee going into this
Yeah.
company, and we
Yeah.
spent 5 years trying to change the world in renewable energy and wind energy, and that ultimately didn't work, and that's a whole nother episode. But learned an enormous amount, really appreciated that, and it gave me the courage to sort of keep going and say, okay, if not this, then what, and
Yeah.
where do I belong, and keep going and keep moving, and so that transition in my mid 30s from corporate guy that was always climbing the ladder, always saying, okay, I need to build out this one additional skill set. I need one more rotation in this product group or whatever it might be. Eventually I realized I was hiding, and I
Hmm.
need to either do it and be the person I thought I was or acknowledge that I was someone other than that, and that's okay too,
Hmm.
but I needed to sort of have a reckoning for myself.
Hmm. And that's that self-awareness that you're talking about earlier as well. How important this comes up so much with clients. Actually, we're working with a client right now where the sense of meaning is something that they're looking for. Like, how do they foster that? And this is like a 700, 800 person company. How important has meaning been for you? Like, how important is it in general? And then maybe if you can also talk about how you've thought about that in the teams that you've been in.
It's incredibly important to me. And in fact, it sort of makes all the difference. I, looking at my father's career, he worked for a company called General Foods, which was put together with Kraft and became part of bigger conglomerates. And he sort of ran brands and things. And I always looked at what he did and I said, oh my God, that's boring. He
Hmm.
worked on dog food and instant coffee and things like that. And I thought, that's got to be the dullest thing in the world.
Mm.
And he always used to say, well, it's not the product, it's what I get to do and who I get to do it with. And that was always kind of interesting to me. And I used to think about that and I thought, well, I agree with him. However, I do need for myself to add that element of, if not so much the product, then the impact of that product.
Yeah.
And so that's what took me originally into renewable energy. And I spent about a dozen years in different places in renewables, helping in, create products that saved water and electricity, or that created electricity, improved solar output, wind output, things like that. And then eventually, as a parent, I started to get involved in the college admissions process with my kids and saw just an enormous mess and a system that was in desperate need of change. And I thought that was intellectually interesting, but I didn't decide to commit myself and my time to the problem until I realized that the problem is not evenly distributed amongst the schools and the students in the system. That the wealthy kids whose parents had higher education levels did significantly better. And when you look at the graduation rate at the Ivy Plus schools is 95+%. If you look at the graduation rate for the public universities that have essentially open admission, it's about 30%. So it's 3 times better. Your outcomes are 3 times better if you're rich and well educated to begin with. And the African American graduation rate is half the white graduation rate. And so when I started to look at this problem and say, that is something that I find intellectually and sort of professionally interesting as to how to solve the problem. But once I connected to the mission side of it to say, I want to use technology to level the playing field, then it became something that I wanted to commit my time to. And I kind of moved from my focus on renewable energy into a focus on higher education outcomes.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we'll come back to Troove in more detail. That was a nice kind of introduction to what you guys do. I'd imagine in that process, as a college admissions kind of matching platform, do you feel like there's a shift, there's a trend towards people prioritizing meaning in their work? Are you able to see that early on in the process in terms of the colleges people are choosing?
I think generationally today, students are more in touch with that, and prioritize that more than perhaps prior generations. And I think that's a good thing. I look at my generation, and I think those who were raised in the 80s, the 90s, there was this, okay, you have to make money, you've got to prioritize his career, it's about status. And I'm happy to report it looks like we're well past that, and that students are definitely looking for meaning. But it creates at the same time, I think, quite a pressurized situation, maybe even more so, when students start saying, well, geez, I'm 18 years old and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with my life, or I might make the wrong choice. And oh my gosh, if I make the wrong choice, my life is over. I hear that phrase oftentimes from teenagers.
Yeah.
And you try to explain, like, no, it's not over. It's just starting.
You have so much more time. Yeah, you have way more time than you think.
Yeah. But that, you had asked earlier about sort of building teams and the importance of mission to the team. I mean, I think you can have really effective, responsible organizations that are not necessarily mission oriented. But I think of it as a founder that the principle of that mission orientation is very important to me. And the culture of the company that I want to build is mission oriented. And I do want people that feel passionately about that and are going to go the extra mile, not because there's financial reward, but because this is a system that is really broken and desperately needs improvement and change. And that affecting that change is something that gets you out of bed in the morning without an alarm clock, and that you just plow all of your creativity and energy into. And that mission orientation, I think, just from a culture standpoint, is something that we talk about as being an essential ingredient to success in our culture.
Yeah,
which is, it's a nascent thing, right? This is just a little startup, but that's I want to assume it's going to be a big startup someday, or a big going concern.
Absolutely.
And so how do you establish culture? And I really believe in defining and then acquiring building blocks and building on them intentionally, and to not back into a culture.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit through that? How this is, because I think about this all the time with my business, is in those early stages, you've got almost so much leverage to be able to really set the tone for what kind of culture you want. And you talk about this sort of mission before me. orientation. Are there any practical things or intentional things you're doing now to really set that process up?
Well, we are early in our process, right? So, but thinking about hiring, I believe that my ability to assess your technical skills to perform the function for which you'll be hired is much simpler than
Mm-hmm.
understanding whether you're going to be a good fit for the culture of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think, have to feel the exact same level of passion that I do for this mission, but I do think you have to have that propensity to say, this really truly does matter to me. And that maybe that wasn't something you were going in search of, but that we have to explore that. So sort of building into a recruiting process that, at least the capacity for that. And I think, instead of saying to someone, well, you don't, I'm thinking of interview questions. You don't say, well, explain to me exactly how you've articulated and driven mission within your prior organization. I mean, stuff like that just doesn't work terribly
Doesn't
well.
help. Yeah.
And beware the person who's really good at answering that question.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Um,
performative.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so I look at it, and just say, you need to invest the time, and you need to do your reference checks, and make the
Mm.
reference checks more than simply confirming of dates.
Mm.
Go ahead and try to push those conversations a little bit.
Mm.
I appreciate that when I get those phone calls about people that I've worked with, and I know there's always some sort of legal concerns about going too far in those reviews, but I do believe that what we're trying to do first and foremost, once you've reached the basic technical hurdle, is to then try to find fit of culture, which is, again, we can talk about this later, but that's
Mm.
essentially what we're trying to do for colleges and universities,
Yeah.
is help them to match individuals to culture.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's something that we as a business are trying to get very good at as well.
So let's talk about another thing that in adaptability. It's something, and you mentioned hiring, and I was thinking this is one of the main things I look for in someone is that sort of rate of learning, ability to learn, that adaptability. So it's not less. I always think like their technical skills can be developed, and we'll have the internal processes to do that. But if they don't have an aptitude for learning, it's going to be a lot harder. Does that ring true for you? And how do you kind of filter for that?
At different stages, you have to be looking for different things within companies. And that early stage, it absolutely is an essential ingredient for success, that someone have kind of a hunger for building their portion of the business and a passion, in our case, for the mission of the business. And as you suggest, I don't see any way that you can do that in this early stage work without also being extremely curious and
Mm.
wanting to really always continue learning. But I would add to that a cautionary note that I feel that that's my approach. And what I don't want to do is just populate a company with people who are just like me. I think we all tend to hire people that are most like us and that we sort of are drawn to personally. And I think that can be a mistake.
Yeah.
So not continue to just sort of try to clone yourself is
Yeah.
important as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out because that is, I mean, that's actually antithetical to adaptability because if it's the system is not going to learn anything new, it's going to just keep churning out the same results essentially. So
Right.
you want
Right.
that almost built-in volatility. Yeah, you mentioned curiosity. I mean, that's my company's called Curious Lines. It's a very important part for us. How do you know if someone's curious? How can you tell?
Yeah, I think you just take it head on and start talking about it. So tell me something you're curious about. Tell me, what's the last thing you learned? What are you thinking about? What, kind of when you're daydreaming about solutions and building things, what's going on in your head? I mean, someone could be curious about something that I know nothing about. In fact, I prefer that because I'm a guy who started a company that's essentially kind of a data science psychometric company, that's a software that's in higher education. And I am not a data scientist, not a psychometrician.
Mm.
I have not built my career in higher education. I couldn't code myself out of 3 lines.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so I need to surround myself with people that have expertise to, as I say, and I'll see you and raise you. It's like, okay, yeah, I get what you're saying, but maybe you didn't think about this, or now you're into my sphere. Let me tell you. And so that idea of engaging a conversation and saying, explain to me some areas that you're curious about, some things you're thinking about. And if someone says, well, in like what area, if they're just not picking it up, then they're not, I
Yeah.
don't think, a curious person.
Yeah.
But if you find that person, and I really believe that curiosity is a fundamental, as clearly as any skill set you would need to help our business to grow, is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, without someone being overly rehearsed in that answer, if they are genuinely curious, it won't take much to sort of pick the scab off that tongue
Yeah.
and have it come gushing out and say, oh my gosh, I was just learning how to knit the other
Yeah.
day, and I was
Yeah.
the patterns and whatever it is, I don't care.
Right.
But that
Right.
curiosity, you either flip that, it's kind of a binary thing, right?
Right.
It's on or off.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. I want to go back to another important trait that you mentioned, or characteristic, or skill, maybe resilience. So you talked about
Yeah.
how, when that first startup failed, you took what you learned from that and you carried on in renewables. You an amazing career after that at NRG and various other places in that field, and now obviously taking it into Troove. But that resilience is such a key part of this, right? Because again, the uncertainty and volatility is the norm. That is the status quo. And so there will always be something that goes wrong. There will always be something that happens that's unpredictable, that's unplanned. And being able to respond to that with curiosity, with self-awareness, with all these things is really, it feels like we see, I think, a key to leadership in that. Can you expand on that?
There's an off-quoted, I don't know where it really started, but the quote is something to the effect of, starting a company is the exercise of going from disappointment to disappointment with no loss of enthusiasm.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And I think that can be applied to a lot of things, right? And I don't mean that my career or my company is just a continual set of disappointments, but you have to continue to power through and say, okay, I'm going to find the silver lining in everything. And I don't know whether that is nature or nurture. I think that I have that natural ability, and I've nurtured it hard in my career. I one of my early jobs in my career, it was a job that was so terrible it doesn't exist anymore. I sold long distance telephone service door to door to small businesses right out of college.
Yeah.
And so I was trained to go knock on doors and get in there and try to sell them to use our long distance service, which again it's not even a thing anymore. But and so we had to knock on 50 doors a day, and I was told up front, if one person out of those 50 says yes, you're good to go. You've had a good day, which means that you need to be prepared to be told no 49 times a day with no loss of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And so here I am trying to change the higher education industry. And this is literally the 387th year of college admissions in the United States. And we've been doing it the same way for 387 years. And so I'm trying to get them to do it differently. And so I acknowledge that's going to be hard to do. And that I might have to knock on 100 doors to get one to open.
Yeah.
And so I have trained myself to say, oh, great, this is one of the no's, which means I'm one step closer to the yes.
Yeah.
And I just, boom, I can go through it. So at that micro level, sort of having that kind of resilience, I think comes a little bit naturally, but then you also train yourself to say, don't be discouraged, because that's part of the process.
Yeah.
The other essential piece is to make sure that you are taking your victories and learning at each step as well. So, if, for example, we were pitching our service with sort of two key benefits. And we were driving from one meeting to the next, and we were listening to a podcast. Again, that's sort of that curious mentality. And we were talking about something else, but the way they were positioning, I said, what if we reversed the two things we're talking about and sold the other one first? Because I was sure it was intentionally the order we had it, because I thought that was right.
Yeah.
I said, well, what if I'm wrong? Let's try it. And now that's the way we do it, because you just have to be curious about it. So from that defeat came, again, the curious mindset that led us to, what if we flipped it upside down? And let's try it that way. And on you go. So keep acknowledging the learning in defeat.
Yeah. So I think this is a very important insight. Now we call the methodology that we teach companies is called adaptive intelligence. And this example that you just gave now is the perfect example of that, because there's a bias to action that's part of this, that so you were trying something, you were driving from from prospect to prospect, trying different things. There was an experimentation bias as well, so you were willing to try different things. You were curious and learning from outside sources as well. And I think you even said this earlier, like there was a think differently I think Steve Jobs, or think different
Yeah,
is like his
right,
thing. Yeah.
right.
And there was that part of it as well, so you were kind of using your imagination to say like, oh well, what if it was like this, and then you had the guts to try it as well. It feels like that skill of all that, the sort of adaptive intelligence of all those things that you had to do there, is a very underrated and undertrained and underdeveloped skill in companies. Has that been kind of true to what you've seen in your career?
It absolutely is, and the people that have that skill, I am so drawn to.
Mm,
I remember early on, one of the startups I was a part of, one of the board members is the managing partner of one of the top law firms in the country, specializing in startups. And I didn't even know who this person was until I sort of looked it up. But he said at one point in a board meeting, he said, my job is to help you see around the corner.
mm,
I thought, oh, I love that expression.
mm,
To help you see around the corner, which suggests I have some visibility that you don't, some experience you don't. I can see things you can't, and I'm here to help. I'm here to warn
mm,
you. And so I think about that all the time and try to
mm,
think, can I play that role on a team to say, hey, or with customers,
mm,
hey, let's look around the corner. Let me tell you what I see, and you tell me whether you agree with that. When
mm,
you're selling something like we're selling, which is kind of V1 of what we want to be, multiple stages of evolution, don't sell V1, sell V5. Help them see around the corner, help them have
mm,
that vision, inspire them with that. So yeah, I'm
mm,
very drawn to that trait, the ability to to think it, to see it, and then articulate it,
mm,
and then take the time to share that. That combination of skills
mm.
is an essential role on a team, to have someone who says, I'm looking around the corner and this is what I see.
Yeah.
And hope that person is a half full positive kind of person.
Yeah. Right.
Um, right. But that there are others that are waiting for that inspiration, that need that jolt, and want to then sort of pick up some of the load and say, okay, let's go. And they help you
Mm.
then to get there, to get around the corner.
Yeah, so it feels like, and again, this is for us is also kind of new. So it sounds like we might be at a similar kind of stage in our journeys of at least like a product that we're working on launching. And for us, what we're seeing, I think what we see is that skill is actually something that everyone can do, and it can definitely be activated and developed in everyone. But what I'm starting to realize is that what holds people back is that person who's like, I can see around the corner, that they don't know that vision, that idea, that thing that they see is true or not, right? They can't. It's the future, right? So they kind of okay with that ambiguity, right? They're like, this might be the case, and so I'm going to point it out to you, and let's see if it is. There's that sort of like, you know what I mean, and that I feel like is difficult for some people to do. It's a little uncomfortable because that could be wrong, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
And the willingness to fail, and from a leadership standpoint, creating enough opportunity for someone to fail and not have that be terminal.
Right.
I mean, again, it's a sort of, it can't always be true, but you have to give people room to sort of articulate what they see around the corner, to try to bring others to that place where others can see it, others can contribute to making it real. Um, but it's not always the correct vision. It's not always complete. But fostering that communication
Yeah.
and creating the expectation that it's part of your responsibility to look out there, and it is part of your responsibility to bring people to that same place, I think is a really important
Yeah.
piece. And I think of it as a parent, that I have always, my kids are all grown now. in their 20s, but they knew that I wasn't going to do it for them. Right. And I think that's another really important piece to this, is that you have to allow people to then do for themselves, instead
Yeah.
of them providing a vision and then having you trample over them to then say, okay, I got it from here. Thank you.
Yeah.
You have to let people have they see the dessert. They got to get a bite of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking of that example of you in the car, listening to that podcast, and you're like, oh, maybe let's flip the order of how we pitch in this thing. Again, like you could have tried that and it may not have worked, and you would have been back to square one. But there's that, you were willing to try and you were okay with the outcome either way, right? It was actually, the outcome is knowing, which is if it's right or not, right? So it's a good outcome no matter what. You're going to get the answer. Yeah.
And regardless, it provokes really meaningful conversation, and it makes us think differently and interact and sort of kick things around and move our collective understanding forward.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
I think is always an important piece. And that's something that goes back to that. You have to let people try and then fail.
Yeah.
And recognize that there is learning and positivity in that failure. But you have to take the time to recognize it.
Yeah.
Not let it be a drain on you, and then move on.
So how do you think about speeding up this process? Because that's sort of like the next step as well. So, okay, so we know it's a trial and error slightly, right? We want to experiment, we're going to learn, we're going to see it worked or didn't work, we make adjustments. Like, how do you think about trying to string that together and speed it up?
When you've got a budget, right, whether you're a big company or a small company, there are time frames and you have to operate within them. And so I'm a big believer in creating metrics and have people participate in the creation of those metrics. It's not enough for me to say, well, your sales quota is X, and have that person go, yeah, in their mind, they're saying, I'll never get that done. Right. But if you say, well, how many do you think you can sell over what time period? Let's have that conversation, but then be clear that that is the objective. So, to me, that is a very important element to this is clearly articulating what the success metrics are and the time frame for that, and what the consequence is if it's not working. Because it might be, we'll shut that down and go off and do this, or it might be, I can't afford to pay you if you're not doing X or Y. We are going to take a chance, and this is your ball to run with, but you have to accept that there will be a consequence if you're not there. And when you get there, this is what then happens, right? You see this reward or this increase in territory or whatever it might be.
Right. Incentives, aligning the incentives.
Exactly.
Of it. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. One thing that I think we're also seeing is that this ability, this adaptive intelligence, is really useful in low data environments, right? Where you don't have much to go on, and you've got to really kind of think out of the box. And it's almost like whatever you decide is going to create momentum. It's going to move the conversation forward, because there's no certainty. So there's no point in trying to think of the perfect next action. It's almost like any action is good, is going to keep the sort of the conversation going. And then obviously it's not completely random. So you've got your experience, and the more you do this, you build more experience. And so those actions become more effective, I guess. But there is this low data environment. And so now a lot of low data environments exist. Like a sales call is a perfect example of that. Negotiations, right? Like there's like, it's high impact, low data. There's not, and often a lot of decisions get made in those moments, high pressure, low data. Is that true as well for what you've seen in your career? Like, how have you been able to navigate those low data environments?
Yeah, I think you have to be selective about where you are putting your time to gather data. I mean, I'm just thinking back to an example of, we were developing, I was working at Whirlpool, and we were developing the first large format front loading washing machines for the US market back in 2000. And I was the product manager, and we had only a certain amount of budget left. And I had about 6 different things I wanted to get done. But all of them were going to create data for me that were going to help me to do something. But I ended up spending the money on some consumer research on the brand name. And because I knew that the name of the product was going to be somewhat contentious in the building, and that I needed the approval of the president of North America at that point for this. This was a really big project, and so I spent I don't know what it was, $25,000 or something on field and consumer research at that point on a couple of different names that yielded the brand name, which was called the Whirlpool Duet, for this large washer and dryer. And the name persisted for I'm not sure they still use it, but that was 20 plus years ago, and they used it for close to 2 decades. But I was able to walk into the president and say, we're going to call this the Whirlpool Duet, and I have the consumer research to support that. And he looked at it and went through it. Okay, well, since it says we'll have the data on that. But then there were other things we said, okay, we're going to, I listed off 5 other decisions for which I had very little data. But I determined that once I established that we had this data for this other thing, it sort of created the impression that everything was that thoughtfully done.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And so it was, I chose the right elements. I created some amount of data. And then I put a lot of other stuff on the plate that we sort of shoved through at the same time. So
Yeah, that's interesting. We do this exercise called plotting forward, where you kind of you take one course of action and you plot it forward in your mind of what could happen. And what a lot of participants who go through this see is that it knocks over dominoes that they didn't anticipate. That actually, your to-do list of all the 4 or 5 other things that you didn't get the data for, actually don't really matter anymore because of this one thing and the second, third, and fourth order consequences it had.
Yeah, that's the definition of momentum, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that sometimes it shows up at just the right time. Because if I'm out there looking, I'm getting 99 no's and 1 yes.
Yeah.
But that 1 yes says, you know what? Hey, I've got this friend who's going to love this. Can I make a phone call for you? Yes, you can. Or, hey, what if you tweak this or change this, or could you offer this? And as long as you're open to it, then that it starts to create this momentum and this energy. And people buy into that as well, because now they're invested and they found someone who's listening to them.
Yeah. So exactly. And that creates opportunity, right? So that momentum brings opportunity. And then you talked about openness. If you're open to those opportunities, you're well placed for whatever comes. So let's segue now into, I guess, the sort of closing part of this conversation around Troove. And I want to know, how are you applying that nugget there, that insight, to Troove? How are you ensuring you get enough at bats? You're getting enough cycles through this to build that kind of momentum so that your opportunities increase.
Yeah, I've worked in a lot of industries, from toothpicks to turbines. I've sort of done it all in consumer spaces and B2B spaces, industrial.
Yeah.
And in each of these markets, there is a very consistent, well-established bell curve of adoption that says, there's and whatever language you might use for this, but it's the early adopter out front.
Yeah.
And then kind of that fast follower. And then the heart of that curve is the slow follower. And so when you're out there looking for those early adopters, most of us, I don't think anybody walks around and says, well, I'm an early adopter. And it's not universally true, right? You might accept that role in some areas of your life and completely the opposite in other areas. So it's not as if I'm seeking people that say, yep, you found me. I'm definitely one of those.
Yeah,
you just have to keep looking, right?
Yeah.
And so we take that approach of looking for those 1 in 10, 1 in 50, whatever. But it's a small number out front of the tail of that bell curve, and keep going. And don't view the people that are not there as anything other than an opportunity to sort of keep moving and say, okay, I found you, you're not it.
It's not a detractor. It's not like
it's not a detractor. And don't waste your time. Right. And this is advice I really struggle with for myself too. I mean, there's a school that was one of our early beta customers in sort of the test phase, and most of our beta partners have joined with us, and they're really gangbusters. But this one guy, he's not an early adopter. And my ego just wants this guy to work with us, right? I'm like, I have this sort of never say die kind of gene in me, and I keep going back to this guy, and seeing you've got a lion and an elephant behind you, I keep trying to convince the elephant that he's a lion. He's not.
Exactly.
As much as I might tell him how amazing he is
Yeah.
and how much he's going to love being a lion. He can't be a lion.
Yeah.
And there will be a time for lions and elephants.
Yeah.
This is not it. And so be selective, be disciplined, don't view it negatively, and just get on with the job at hand.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice for so many things. And I feel like as well, another important aspect of this is for those early adopters is just keeping the message simple, right? Like it's not, right? Like that doesn't, it doesn't help to go into convincing mode and try and make the bulletproof business case,
Yeah.
right? Like that actually is counterproductive sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, when Jerry Maguire, when Renee Zellweger said, "You had me at hello," right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's kind of where you have to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's not that, then keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good, and that maps again to this idea of adaptive intelligence, creating momentum, fast experimentation loops, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so to take this conversation to a close, I want to drill down a little bit more into Troove and how it works, because you're clearly quite data forward. You mentioned like the psychometrics and that. I'm curious how this works and how are you serving that market of what sounds like an underserved in terms of their ability to kind of pick the college that's right for them. I don't know, and my kid's only 3, so I will deal with this college. Hopefully I won't have to deal with it because you'll have sorted it out by then. But I know it's a landmine and it's a horrible process to go through. But so how does Troove work? What's the insight that you landed on here?
Yeah, it's a very simple insight. If you think about how we all buy things today, or make decisions about what to listen to next or what to watch next. Netflix says, did you like this or do you not like it? Spotify says that, Amazon says that. And so experienced users of the medium, of the product, whatever it might be, are weighing in to say, I enjoyed the experience, and they create a pattern. And so you are shown the next movie to watch on Netflix based on the similarity of your pattern with other experienced viewers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at higher education and I say, well, we are not factoring in experienced users at all into the decision-making process for the prospective new users. And it's a very simple insight to say, well, the best predictor of future success is past success, or that within the culture of a school, academically and socially, we can understand that that place will be a great fit for some people and not for others. And we can use data and relatively small amounts to actually assess this, to figure out what is what we refer to as the learning culture and the social culture of a school based on the recently graduated or current students of a school, in order for me as a prospective student to then take a very short quiz up front and find my people, find the places where I am most likely to find not just enrollment success, but long-term graduation success, which is really the goal. And so I'd say those two key insights, that it's not about getting in, it's about getting out. And so if you change the metric and change the point of view and say, we should be looking at graduates, not last year's applying class. And then we should say, okay, academically and socially, what can we learn from these people to say what were the values and priorities and interests and passions of those people? And that would then be a great predictor for people that have those same desires to go look at those schools. We're not assigning schools to people. We're saying this is the subset of the 4,000 colleges and universities in the US that might be of interest to you. And then that gives you a dramatically better chance of meeting someone in the admissions office and saying, oh my goodness, this is perfect. I love this. And you have this and that. And when I toured campus virtually or in person, I really connected with these people because they get excited about what I'm excited about. Then you find your place. And so those simple insights, instead of asking a teenager, well, what do you want to major in? Because what teenagers know even what the verb means.
Yeah.
Do you want to go to a big school or a small school, city school or country school? Those are the questions that we asked historically and still today, and they're useless. And we don't want to build the technology around those types of questions. We want to figure out what turns you on and turns you off academically and socially, and then connect you with the places where people with those same passions have achieved the graduation success you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Yeah.
And the transformative nature of that for the schools is profound, right? Because
Yeah.
they have had this business model that says, we're going to sell you a 4-year degree, and then we're going to chase you for the rest of your life to give us money for nothing.
Right.
And everybody hates that business model.
Right.
And so what we're proposing to them is different, that in this modern age of education technology and online learning and being able to take a 2-week course on cryptocurrency if you want to, if your deep connection and where you get your learning from is your undergraduate institution, that's where you go to for learning, then for the rest of your life, graduate degrees, certifications, career retraining, general interest, hobbies, passion, fun stuff.
Mm.
If your source of that is your undergraduate institution, because those are your people, right? You're deeply connected there. Your fit is there. Then that provides an opportunity for you to learn and exchange value for a lifetime. And it's a huge, huge improvement for schools who today are struggling because we have these declining pools of students, and the confidence in the need to go to college at all is really suffered right now. And so this really is a game changer for saying, find your people and source your education there for your whole life. And that has to start with fit.
Fascinating. That's really, really interesting stuff. As a closing question, what's your sort of what's the next goal? What's the next target or challenge that you've got to knock over to get to this kind of long-term vision?
Yeah. So we started this really with sort of a 2-stage process in mind. Stage 1 is to prove this matching technology, to build a platform that is interesting to students and that schools will pay us for. So that's our business model today, is free for students and paid for by the colleges and universities, who collectively are spending billions, almost $15 billion a year right now to attract students. And that our platform includes all 4,000 of those schools out there. And I think we've done a really great job of attracting and demonstrating we can draw students and we can draw schools to pay us for that as well. Version 2 of this then goes after, it adds a lot of functionality, and it really pivots from a focus on the B2B side of it to make this a consumer-driven opportunity. We want to become the brand, so the verb in a category, right? There is no brand or business that really satisfies and dominates the consumer's mind to think, where do I get my education? Where do I go to college? Where do I, more broadly, what do I do? I mean, there are almost 100 million Americans who are adults who don't have a college degree. And so there's huge opportunity there. But we wanted to then add functionality, pivot to the consumer side, and build this really large brand that consumers can say, I can go take this quick quiz, this really interesting dynamic thing that doesn't take me any time at all, and it immediately matches me with schools, and I can indicate my interest there, connect digitally with them schools, and not have to wait for junk mail and email and all that stuff to catch up. So you're like a dating app for college. You're directly connecting to the schools where you have the best fit. You're then choosing which ones you want to talk to, and they're speaking to you directly and immediately in that forum. And then you're taking it into to whatever conversation you want to about whether you should enroll there. So there's a huge opportunity right now to help not just get kids into college, and that's not our goal. Our goal is to get kids out of college. In fact, not even just college. We would love to normalize trade school in the United States and say that's a wonderful alternative for a lot of kids. And how can they proudly find the right trade to go into and connect with the training they need and the mentors they need, the jobs they need. So there's a great opportunity to sort of be the transition from high school, from your younger self into your professional self, and helping people to find the passion, the people, and the place that will get them there is the goal of Troove.
Have you looked at apprenticeships as well? Is that in the
Yeah, that's definitely all part of it. Guidance counseling is another area that the average ratio of students to guidance counselor in this country is about 420 to 1. So most students, and especially those without significant means, are not getting a lot of guidance. And so using this as a networked platform to give information and data about social fit and academic fit, and then to have actually live guidance available to them. And then that connects to both school opportunities, training opportunities, and networked apprenticeships, internships, and career opportunities from there. It's all the same system. And it obviously lends itself really well to a networked approach, which is kind of the V2 of this for us.
That is awesome. I hope to be telling my son Leo to Troove it in 15 years' time.
And I'm hoping that Leo just grows up knowing that. If he's 3 today, he better know that by the time he's of age.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with me, share your experience, your journey here, indulge on some of this topic of adaptive intelligence. Been really fun. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.